Hello, it's Alex, the Bookubus, and today I'm going to be doing a bit of a reading wrap-up. I decided to devote the past month or so to reading extreme horror, so I wanted to talk about them. I did a vlog for the entire month of reading that I just finished up. Hopefully that video should have gone up by now, and it's probably a bit of a long one, but if that sounds like fun and you haven't watched it yet, then I will leave a link to that, so feel free to go check it out. It's mostly just my thoughts as I'm reading the books, interspersed with cute videos of my pets. So yeah, my life isn't super interesting to really include much else, although I did go to a library book sale at some point and found some goodies, so that's in there too. Anyway, let's get on to talking about these books. So I had a total of 7 books that have been on my radar for differing periods of time, and I decided why not put them together and devote a whole reading month to tackling them. And there are a couple in here that I would maybe not class as extreme horror, but you know, the term is somewhat subjective, and I think I had heard other people mention them in that kind of category, so you know, I'll get to that in a bit more detail as I get to talking about the books. But yeah, most of these do tackle some more gruesome type of content. A lot of them have a lot of blood and guts, violence. There's a lot of sexual violence in a lot of them. Some of them include things like animal cruelty. Some of them include things happening to babies and children. So yeah, the content isn't going to be for everyone. I think extreme horror in general isn't for everyone, and you know, I don't say that in the sense of like, you know, if you can't handle it, you're not cool enough, or you know, you're not a real horror fan if you don't like this stuff. We all have our own different likes and dislikes. If you don't like something, don't like it. You know, I do think extreme horror and, you know, its kind of surrounding types of things do get a bit of a bad rap. I think people, or you know, some people do tend to dismiss that whole type of horror as being, you know, purely for shock value, and you know, it's just gore for gore's sake. And I mean, yeah, fair enough, if you don't like that stuff, that's entirely up to you, but I think it is a bit unfair to just completely dismiss it. I think some people tend to think it's all really poorly written and there's no, you know, redeeming qualities or any merit to this kind of fiction, which I would disagree to. You know, I mean, yeah, of course there are going to be some books within this subgenre that aren't good, you know, aren't written very well and don't have much merit to them, but I don't think that's down to the nature of being extreme horror. I think, you know, there are poorly written books in all types of genres, in all types of literature, so yeah, to kind of single out extreme horror as being an example of rubbish is, I think, unfair. But you know, still, the fact remains, to each their own. If you like something, you like it. If you don't like it, you don't like it. You know, we're all going to have our own likes and dislikes within the genre, so that is totally fine. Personally, I do like extreme horror. You know, I have read some in the past, and I have seen quite a lot of extreme horror films, or you know, films that would be classed as disturbing. I am just kind of really drawn to that kind of thing. I think my morbid curiosity and morbid fascination is pretty strong, and sometimes I'm just like, I just need to know, I need to experience this. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, you could probably pick that apart more deeply if you wanted, and psychoanalyze if you really want, but I just know that it's something that I enjoy from time to time. You know, I enjoy lots of things within horror. And another thing is when people dismiss extreme horror as, purely being gore for gore's sake, or the only reason it's being written is the author is trying to shock the reader. It kind of makes me think, well, is there something wrong with that? You know, should authors not try to shock? You know, is there something wrong with gore for gore's sake? I mean, fair enough, if you don't like it, then, you know, don't read it, but why is that? It's just interesting that that kind of content seems to be singled out. You know, you don't get anyone saying, oh yeah, that's just atmosphere for atmosphere's sake, you know? So anyway, I do think it's a really interesting topic. It's an interesting subgenre. There's definitely a much bigger conversation to be had about it, which, yeah, I'll kind of try not to get into here, because otherwise this will be another super long video like the vlog ended up being. But instead I'm gonna, wrap that up and start talking about the books I read. Okay, so first up I read The Light at the End by John Skipp and Craig Spector. This was originally published in 1986. And this is one I would class more as splatterpunk than extreme. Again, I think there's a much bigger conversation to be had about the differences between the two, but I think the punk notion and attitude is an element of this one, and I think while it does have some, blood and guts, and it does have a couple of particularly gruesome moments, I don't know if I would personally class it as extreme. Anyway, I'm going to call this a splatterpunk novel. I think that is more what it is generally seen as, and there is some crossover between splatterpunk and extreme, but sometimes things can be one or the other and not both, you know? Anyway, I don't want to get like super confusing about the categorization of different things, so instead I'll just get to the book itself. So this is set in New York City in the 80s, and there is a vampire that descends on the city and attacks a bunch of people in the subway, and we follow several different people. Some of them know each other, and then some of them are kind of unrelated but end up through different avenues coming together with the others, and together they know that they're looking for a vampire and they find out who it is they're looking for, and so they are taking it upon themselves to track this vampire down and stop the killing. I really enjoyed this one. It was a lot of fun. I found it to be really fast-paced. I thought all of the characters were interesting in their own separate ways, and the way that their stories came together to, form this group against the vampire was really well done. And like I said, there is some blood and guts, there are some violent scenes, there's some gory scenes, there's a couple that were particularly gruesome. There are a couple of, I think, sexual scenes as well, which I think at least one of them does involve rape. So just to be aware of that. And another thing with this one, which I wasn't expecting from a splatterpunk novel, is that there were a couple of times that it got pretty emotional. Like, maybe it was just me, but I teared up at more than one point in this book, which I was not expecting. So that was pretty interesting. I have seen some reviews saying that this is not very well written. I would disagree. I liked it. I think some parts are maybe better written than others, but overall I thought it was really good. It definitely has quite an evocative feel to the writing, and it's kind of gritty, and the fact that it's set in New York City, you've got the sense of that location as well, the city being a real part of the story. With regards to the vampire element, I thought this was really good. It does touch on, the vampire myth, so it does get a bit meta at some point, and references some other vampires of pop culture, which was fun. And I just thought this was a really good read. Really enjoyed it, and I rated it 4 stars. Also, it would be remiss of me to not share what is some of the best author photos of all time. So this was a good one. If you're looking for that kind of 80s vibe, vampire novel, New York City, this is definitely one to check out. Then I read Ritualistic Human Sacrifice by C.V. Hunt, which came out in 2015. This is a novella and is about a couple, Nick and Eve. And Nick is just a really awful person. He's just not a great person, and he's definitely not a great husband. And he comes to the realisation that he wants to get a divorce from his wife. But as he is plucking up the courage to tell her, she reveals that she's pregnant. And anyway, some things play out, and the two of them end up moving to this kind of quirky house in the middle of nowhere, in this kind of somewhat strange small town. And yeah, things get a bit weirder from there. Nick's behaviour up until this point has been really awful. Yeah, the way he treats not only his wife but other people is, yeah, just pretty shitty. But it's written in a way that it is somewhat amusing and entertaining, because you're just like, man, this guy is like such a douchebag. But it is somewhat humorous. Yeah, very darkly humorous. And anyway, things happen in this small town once they've moved into this house, and the locals are all a bit strange. And yeah, I won't say exactly where the story goes, but yeah, this was a really good one. One thing I will say, there's a lot of sex in it, like lots of sexual content. It's rather pornographic, and it got to the point where there was so many sex scenes that it just felt a bit repetitive, and I was just kind of like, oh, another sex scene, you know? So yeah, I still think it was a well-written story, and I really did like the direction that it went into. It went to like a really fucked up place. So I have to give credit to that. In fact, a lot of these, you know, some of my rating is based on the originality of the story and the extreme nature of the content. So, you know, that's definitely part of what I enjoyed about them, and so therefore it's part of my rating of them. Yeah, it's hard to say too much more about this one without getting into spoilers, but it definitely gets messed up. If you have any specific triggers and you would like to know if this book contains them, please feel free to ask. I don't want to at this point give out spoilery information, but if you ask specifically, I'm happy to let you know. And you know, for any of the books I talk about in this video, yeah, just feel free to ask. And yeah, if my memory serves correctly, I will do my best to answer. But yeah, this one was really good. You know, it was a quick read, and definitely went there. So I gave it 4 stars. Then I read This Symbiotic Fascination by Charlie Jacob. This was originally published in 1997, although this leisure edition came out, I think, maybe early 2000s. And this one I absolutely loved. From the get-go, I'm just going to let you know, this was my favourite one of the month. I rated it 5 stars, so this is only one of a few 5-star reads that I've had so far this year, but this one was just so good. It was just so good. Yeah, this one is kind of a hard one to explain because there's a lot going on, but it really works for the story. So one of the main characters is a woman in her late 30s called Torn, and she has never had any kind of romantic or sexual relationship with anyone and is basically resigned to a life alone. And there is another character called Arkan, who we find out is actually a co-worker of Torn's, and you know, the two have a working relationship but nothing more. They don't really know anything about each other outside of work. And he has a history of raping several women, and he has, yeah, done some truly awful things to these women and left them, you know, both physically and mentally scarred for life. And the thing about Arkan is he has these like 3 beings or personas within him, and you know, each one kind of comes out you know, with different wants and needs. So there's the cat, the wolf, and the ghoul, and yeah, together they do things, they do horrible things. And yeah, then there's another character who I won't say too much about, but he is an integral part to the story. And yeah, it's really hard to explain this without just like going beat for beat on where the story goes. But through him, things happen, and yeah, Torn finds herself with these abilities to do certain things. You know, I think she's always wanted to be attractive and be able to, you know, have a relationship with a guy, and so she thinks that by doing something she is gonna, you know, be able to have that, but it doesn't quite turn out that way. So yeah, we're following these different characters' stories and how they kind of intertwine. And yeah, there's another element of the story which again I don't want to go into too much detail on, but it involves a VHS tape, and it was just so bonkers and amazing, and I loved it. So yeah, so that becomes quite a part of the story. And yeah, it was just, her writing is absolutely brilliant. I loved it. It might not be everyone's kind of style, but I really liked it, and I really liked the characters. I thought the story was super original and really well done. I found it to be such a compelling read. And I think I mentioned in the vlog, like towards the end, there were a couple of moments that like made me gasp when like certain things played out. Yeah, so it was just really great. It does get pretty gruesome at times. Like I said, there is some rape here and other violence, you know, of a sexual nature and otherwise. There is, if I'm remembering correctly, there is an animal death, and yeah, I'm blanking on other specifics, but it's pretty fucked up. But for me, the thing that set this apart from the others is the writing. And I'm not saying that the others weren't written well, they were, but the writing in this one was just kind of like another level, you know what I mean? And so the combination of that extreme content and really great writing and a really original story just combined to make a 5-star read for me. So yeah, another thing about this one is it does have kind of a fantastical vibe to some of the story, and like when I hear that word, that's normally just not something that would make me want to read it, but it's kind of fantastical in like the Clive Barker sense. You know, it's dark and messed up and gritty and bloody, so it's that kind of fantastical and weird, but yeah, not in a like, when I don't know, it's hard to describe, and I don't know if I'm doing any kind of job in describing it as well as I could, but hopefully those combination of words give you an idea of whether this might be something you want to pick up or not. But definitely gets my highest recommendation because I loved it and I gave it 5 stars. Next up, I read another novella. This was Dead Inside by Chandler Morrison, which I believe came out in 2015, but it seems to, I think it got a new edition released last year maybe, and has kind of had quite a bit of attention recently. I feel like, yeah, a lot of people have read this and talked about it, and one of the things I've heard from most people is that it's the most disgusting thing they've ever read. So naturally I was like, I guess I'm gonna have to try that one for myself. And you know, the fact that it's super disgusting, you know, some people see that as a good thing and some people see it as a bad thing. So I was, yeah, curious to see where I fell on that spectrum. And yeah, it is really disgusting. It's really fucked up. I mean, it's got necrophilia and it's got cannibalism, specifically of babies. So, you know, you can't really go into this book expecting it not to be messed up, you know, from the get-go. And it definitely is. It definitely goes there. It goes to some super sick places. But the one thing that surprised me about this book, and that I hadn't heard anyone mention, I mean, not that I've read every single review or anything, but, you know, I've seen a few people talk about it here on BookTube, and I've, you know, seen a few reviews on Goodreads, is that it's really funny. Like, it's fucking hilarious. I mean, like, maybe not laugh out loud funny, but it's clearly very darkly humorous, and it really worked for me because the content here, yeah, it could have been really stomach churning, but the fact that it was in, like I said, a darkly humorous context made it not be as gross as it could have been, if that makes sense. You know, my reaction after reading certain scenes was like, oh my god, I can't believe you went there, you sick bastard, rather than, oh my god, I can't believe you went there, you sick bastard. You know, there's a big difference between those two reactions, and mine was definitely the former. But hearing people talk about this book, I was expecting going in and having it being the latter reaction. So it was, yeah, it was kind of a surprise in that respect. And yeah, I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it. You know, there's definitely still some moments that made me wince. But it was a wild ride, and I really enjoyed it. So I rated this one 4 stars, and yeah, I would be interested in reading more of his work. Next up, I read Survivor by J.F. Gonzalez, which originally came out in 2004. And I ended up reading a more recent edition, which is the author's preferred edition. I think it has some changes, some edits. I'm not sure exactly what the difference is between the two, but if this is the author's preferred edition, then I figured I would pick this one up. And this is about a couple, Lisa and Brad, who are going away for a little trip, but things go horribly wrong, and Lisa ends up being kidnapped by a group of people, and they're planning on making a snuff film. And yeah, she is gonna be the star of that film. So as you can probably imagine, yeah, some crazy stuff happens. It's brutal, it's gruesome, it's gory, it's messed up. Not only in some of the scenes that play out within the story, but also it kind of delves into this, you know, underground hardcore scene, and different characters within this story, their history and their involvement in this scene. And so it does touch on other things, which were like super sick and messed up. So I think a couple of the things that probably like grossed me out the most were just things that were mentioned, rather than things that were like actually expanded upon and were, you know, scenes within the story. Yeah, things involving animals and children, no, just no. So yeah, I mean, not that I mean I'm on board with snuff films, don't get me wrong. But yeah, anyway, this was an interesting concept, and yeah, it was a really good story. It read quite like a thriller, actually. There was a lot of tension throughout the story, and at some point the police get involved, so it kind of had that, you know, crime detective aspect as well. And of course, you know, we've got the character of Lisa in peril, and, you know, she's trying to get herself out of this situation and do whatever she can to survive. It was really good. It was definitely quite a gripping read. I think one of the things that kind of let it down a little bit for me, I guess there were a couple of things. One was that the couple, Lisa and Brad, they could have been a bit more likeable, and, you know, I didn't find them super sympathetic. The things that happened maybe could have had a bit more impact had I felt for them a bit more. And then the other thing was that a few times, like, certain characters within the story just, you know, kind of info dump stuff when you kind of think that conversation doesn't sound super believable, like that would actually happen, but I guess it helps, you know, provide us with the info we need to further the story. So yeah, that kind of thing let it down a little bit, but it was still a really gripping story. It definitely had some twists and turns, so, you know, definitely kept me kind of on the edge of my seat. And yeah, it went in a direction that I wasn't expecting, and it also did have a bit of an emotional part as well. Yeah, it was a good read. It was really good. I think this is one that, yeah, it definitely has some super messed up things. You know, I've mentioned a couple of things as well, and because it is talking about this like snuff film, you know, underground scene, and, you know, what people are willing to do for, you know, whether it be sexual gratification or for financial gain. You know, there are some sick people out there in the real world, and like this book, you know, delves into that world and yeah, what people are willing to do, and yeah, people are willing to do some truly awful things. So be aware of that going into this, that it does touch on a lot of that kind of thing. And the other thing it kind of delves into is what people are willing to do to survive. You know, the title is Survivor, so yeah, it does a really good job and an interesting job of that idea. So yeah, this was another really good one, and I rated it 4 stars. Next up, I read True Crime by Samantha Kolesnik, which came out in 2020. And this is one that I wouldn't personally class as extreme horror. It definitely is dark and it has some disturbing content, but I didn't find that it was necessarily like super graphic, you know, in an extreme way. But, you know, I think I've heard other people class this as extreme, so, you know, to each their own, but that's just, you know, my thought on it. Anyway, this is about a brother and sister who escape from their abusive mother, and we're mainly focused on Susie and the ways that her upbringing has shaped her as a person, and, you know, how her life is unfolding because of that. And yeah, basically the two of them are kind of on this road trip and are not averse to killing people as they travel through these places. This was another one that I thought was great. It's really well written. There's a lot of it that is quite, you know, character study focused and kind of, yeah, dissecting who this person is and how they came to be that person and what that means for their future, which was really interesting. It is very dark, it's bleak, super bleak and brutal at times, kind of heartbreaking in places as well. Yeah, just quite nihilistic overall actually in tone, and yeah, I thought it was great though. Really interesting story, and a really well put together story. Yeah, I don't know if I have a ton to say about this one, which isn't to say that there isn't more to say about it, but it's just kind of hard, I think, to put this one into words maybe. And also, you know, some of the things I might touch on would be spoilery, so I don't want to do that. But yeah, again, this one was another great one. I rated it 4 stars, so I'd definitely be keen to read more by this author. Okay, and last up I read The Resurrectionist by Rath James White, which is probably one of the titles that comes up whenever anyone talks about extreme horror or disturbing horror. This one originally came out in 2009, and like Survivor, there is an author's preferred edition which came out more recently, so I decided to go with that one. I think the main difference between this one and the original edition is that there's an epilogue added to the newer edition. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the main difference. So yeah, I figured I would go with the author's preferred edition. And this one is about a character called Dale, and as a kid he finds out that he has the power to resurrect people from the dead. But instead of using this power for good, he becomes a serial rapist and killer of various people that come into his life. and when he kills someone and revives them, they have no memory of what happened. So he's able to just keep doing this to people and get his kicks and yeah, just generally continue being a sick fuck. So we learn about Dale and his growing up, and then the story picks up when he's an adult and he moves into a house next door to a couple, Sarah and Josh. And Sarah becomes the focus of Dale's attention. He thinks that she's the most beautiful woman he's ever seen and he has to have her. So he starts breaking into their house at night, raping and killing them and resurrecting them. And, you know, they will have no knowledge of what had happened. But there are certain things that do, you know, play out that causes Sarah to think something has happened. And so she starts to question this and, you know, starts to suspect Dale of having done something to her. And because she has no proof of it, it's like, did she just dream it or imagine it, or, you know, what the hell could have happened? So she is trying to figure out exactly what is going on. And yeah, this leads her and her husband Josh into, yeah, various situations as the story unfolds. Again, yeah, this one definitely warrants the extreme horror label. It definitely goes there. It goes to some really messed up places, some really gruesome and graphic violence and sexual violence. So again, lots of rape content here to be aware of if you want to avoid that. And yeah, this was a really interesting concept. I think it's a really original idea, and there were times when I don't quite think the book lived up to the idea, but it was still a really good read. And yeah, I did end up rating this one 4 stars as well, because I think the really good moments, yeah, definitely made it worth the read. And also the ending was really great. So yeah, without giving any spoilers, the epilogue, you know, obviously does change some of the ending. I thought both work really well, but in different ways. So that was interesting to see the difference. But yeah, I thought it ended really well and in a satisfying manner. So this one did have some kind of, you know, things that didn't quite work for me. I think the characters, like with Survivor, you know, they weren't super likable. So I didn't really feel for them as much as I could have done. And in this one, they did make some stupid decisions at times that I just felt like, really? Would they really do that? Which, you know, sometimes took me out of the story a bit. And one other thing that is more just on, I guess, the editing side of things, but there were a lot of mistakes, spelling mistakes and stuff in this book. So I don't know whether that was just the Kindle version that I read or whether it's the same in the paperback edition. But especially a lot of, you know, famous names like actors and musicians or whatever, most of their names were spelled incorrectly. And it got to the point where I was like, are they purposely being spelled incorrectly? But if so, why? But otherwise it was just really kind of annoying, and yeah, it took me out of the story every time I read a name that was spelled wrong. And it also just made me wonder, like, how did no one in the editing or proofreading process not catch all of these errors? Yeah, it just kind of baffled me a little bit. So that was kind of annoying and a bit unfortunate. Like, they even spelled Santa Claus wrong, for crying out loud. Like, how does that get through? Anyway, that aside, this was still a really good read. I rated it 4 stars. And yeah, I ended up having a really great reading month. Yeah, 1 5-star read and then the rest were 4 stars. So really can't complain with that kind of reading month. I think I did go into these books with a little, you know, trepidatiousness, whatever the word is. And I guess, you know, hearing other people talk about how messed up and disturbing these books are, you know, even though I do like that kind of thing, or, you know, have liked other stuff I've read and watched in the past, you know, there's always that thought of like, oh God, what if this one really does disturb me? Like, what if this book makes me vomit? Or what if this book really traumatizes me? And yeah, I didn't have that experience. I mean, yeah, there's definitely some disturbing content here, some really gross and messed up things that happen in these books, but I never felt, you know, that it messed me up. I never felt like any of it was so bad that I felt traumatized by it. You know, don't want to sound like an edgelord or anything, or edge lady even, you know, that's not me. But yeah, what is it about me that makes me try to seek it out? I don't know, but I just can't help myself. So yeah, if you feel the same way, let me know. We can form our own club, and yeah, know that we're not the only ones. You know, I'm a really nice person, guys. You know, I like animals, you know, I try to be nice to people, and you know, these are not things I would want to experience in real life, but yeah, that doesn't mean I am not interested in reading about them and watching them, not only as like a source of entertainment, but I don't know, there's just something about like, yeah, going there to these dark places, being confronted with these awful things, that, I don't know, it's just something that I am drawn to. I'm not sure I can really explain why that is. And I know it's not everyone's kind of thing that they would want to seek out. I totally understand that and respect that. But I'm glad that I read some more of it recently and tackled a bunch of titles I've been curious about. And yeah, I look forward to reading more. So I guess if you have any other extreme horror recommendations that you think I should check out, then please feel free to recommend me some. If you've read any of these books, I would really love to hear your thoughts on them. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!